The 28th February 2024. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest, the large screen on the front of the room, and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will advise when it is safe to return to the building. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the Council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Okay, thank you very much everybody. Welcome, welcome. So, number one, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. An apology from Councillor Kirkman.
Thank you very much. Okay, number two, are there any declarations of interest? Okay, no declarations of interest at this time. Item number three, minutes. So, I need a confirmation that minutes of the meeting for the place scrutiny held on the 6th of February 2024. All those in favour, please lift your hands now. Lovely, that is essentially unanimous. Okay, so in a slight change to schedule, we're actually going to go ahead and bring the Essex waste strategy above item number 4, and then it will return to the normal order. So if everyone turns to page 69, and then if I could have the relevant officer on that matter, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a little presentation that goes with tonight, so I'm just going to join and present that to members. Give me a second, please. What a great view for everybody. How do we stop that from... Nobody wants to see... I don't really want to see that. Go. So, can everybody see that okay? Has that come through? Yeah. Lovely. Thank you. So, tonight's the opportunity to bring back the development of the waste strategy for Essex. So this is all of the waste collection authorities across Essex working in partnership with what Essex County Council was the waste disposal authority for Essex. There is a current waste strategy for Essex which was signed off a number of years ago and adopted by Basildon in 2009. As we know from the work on our own waste strategy, legislation's changed, targets have changed, technology's changed, times have moved on, climate change commitments have come to the fore. Our residents expect us to do more on waste and recycling, and Basildon has adopted an ambitious waste programme in 2019, and we've been working with colleagues across Essex over the last couple of years to refresh the waste strategy for Essex. So what I'll be presenting to members tonight, and there's the opportunity to ask any questions on the development of this, is how the public consultation has gone, the feedback from the public consultation on the draft strategy for Essex, and what the likely next steps are for the revised waste strategy. You'll see that it takes a long time period in. It runs from 2024 to 2054, and I think it's no understatement to say it's no small feat to get to this point, because there are obviously a number of different waste collection authorities, and Essex have been working together to develop this. And there's been a great input from residents of this borough and across the county, and quite a lot of effort to get to this point. So that will become clear as we go through the presentation. So today what I'll go through is the overview of the consultation process, the consultation insights, what will be considered as part of following on from the consultation, and the likely next steps for the waste strategy for Essex. As I mentioned in my introduction there, the revised strategy talks about refreshing the current waste strategy for Essex, which was adopted in 2009. It says times and technology have changed, and so must we. I think that I've made those points clear around some of the changes in legislation and commitments around what we collect at curbside, how we process that. And I think it's worth highlighting that Basildon, as a collection authority, own one part of the system, our residents own another part, and there is the disposal element, and also what happens in the producer space, and the revised Essex Waste Strategy touches on all of those, but also retains the autonomy for Basildon as the waste collection authority to determine the best way in which to meet both our ambitions, and it allows us to set ambitions which go beyond what Essex are proposing and what the legislation is proposing as well. So we do retain sovereignty within that. What it does is gives us that framework for the delivery of waste management across Essex, which does tie back into the legislative footing, and also creates better opportunities for us to work together on communications campaigns and key messages and key materials, because we may have seen some works that have taken place under the Love Essex banner. That's something which all partner authorities work on together. To target key materials, to target key behaviours, to reduce the amount of, you might have seen the campaign to reduce the prevalence of food waste in households and to encourage meal prepping, and there was a campaign to get reusable cups into the communities and things like that. So there's been quite a lot of activities which have taken place under the Love Essex branding previously. So there are more opportunities around working together and to build upon the works which have taken place already. I think it's worth flagging up, like I said, that the draft strategy has been developed collaboratively. It's been done in open, and there's been various opportunities for residents to help shape and influence that. The most recent of which was a public consultation, which was delivered between the 13th of September and 22nd of November last year, which I'll share some of the results tonight. So the draft strategy, in summary, has the following commitments on it. It has the waste hierarchy, which you'll recognise from Basildon's own waste strategy. That's something which is enshrined in legislation as well, with the ambition of moving material up that pyramid, so prevention being better than reuse, above recycling, above recovery, and then disposal as a last resort for anything that's left over. There is a zero waste vision statement in there, and that talks about zero waste to landfill and reducing the impact of waste within that. And within the draft strategy, there are some legislative targets, but there are also some stretch targets where members of the group felt it was more appropriate to go above and beyond where the legislation makes us go. It talks about focus on prevention, reuse and recycling, again driving material up towards the top three areas of the waste hierarchy. Recovery of materials and recovery of energy as part of that process, realigning Essex with the national targets, but also setting some stretching ambitions for us, and a focus on education, engagement and progress reporting. So what we mean by that, and this is where it chimes with Basildon's own strategy, it's about education first, then enforcement, but also regular updates on how we are doing as a county to manage obviously the scale of waste which is produced by Essex as a county. I've spoken about the time the consultation was open. The consultation documents were available in every Essex County Council library. The documents were available online. There were alternative formats via phone as well as in person, and there were help to provide to fill out the survey as well. And there were regular communications which were amplified and supported by our communications colleagues in Basildon as well. Essex partnered with a firm which gave the external quality assurance based on the completion of the consultation and throughout as well. And you may have seen the advert that's on the right hand side there with the QR code. That was on a number of I think it was in train stations or on bus platforms and bus stations and various locations during the consultation period. What it did mean was that the consultation completed over 4,500 people responded to the consultation, which was considered a good number. Good to see that the residents of Basildon were over-represented, so 12% of the Essex population, but 15% of the respondents, so a good showing from Basildon residents. And you can see the split across the rest of the boroughs and districts across Essex there. But good news for Basildon, because it means that people did take part in the survey. So a massive thank you to our residents for that. the key principles which I outlined on a couple of slides ago, the general feedback here is around the level of agreement. So broadly, respondents to the consultation survey were largely in agreement with the proposals, and I'll go into a bit more detail on the subsequent slides as to where respondents felt that the ambitions were and where they could go further. I think that particularly areas which were strong in terms of response were the ambitions around recovery and education, engagement, and also reuse. So there was an expectation that there would be more works done in that space. But broadly, all of the key principles that were in there were largely supported. And if I go to the next slide, that shows what some of the targets and ambitions of the strategy are and what people felt around that in terms of where they'd responded. So you can see on the right-hand side some of the key targets and aspirations. So we've got quite a lot on there. You can see where it has a little target symbol next to it. That's something which is a legislative target. And when it's got the stars against it, that's where there is an ambition to go above where the legislation takes us. So it's contributing to reducing the county's greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. That is something which is within Basildon's targets as well. Halving the amount of residual waste produced per person by 2042. So we're talking about going above and beyond that and aiming to reduce waste by 10% by 2030. So that's a lot sooner, but the direction of travel is there on that. And we aspire that Essex will be a zero waste county by 2055. And that was one of the areas that there was particular feedback from respondents to the survey on, because there is the phrase zero waste doesn't really mean a lot to most people out and about. So there's been some consideration around how we would word that and what that means in terms of communication. On the recycling level, we will reuse, recycle or compost 65% of waste by 2035. That is something which Basildon has committed to as part of its waste strategy as well. But the aspiration across Essex Partners was that we aim to reuse, recycle or compost at least 70% of waste by 2030. So there is obviously a stretch target there, but with the caveat that we obviously did say that individual waste collection authorities do have sovereignty over the way in which they reach the targets and aspirations or otherwise. One of the targets is to send no more than 10% of waste to landfill by 2035, but zero waste to landfill by 2030 is an aim, and I think that's something that was fed back on as part of the consultation activity. And in terms of collection services, we will ensure that all Essex residents have access to separate food waste collections by 2026. That's a legislative target, but obviously Basildon is ahead of that already, and we do have that in place already. And we will assure that all Essex residents have access to comprehensive recycling services for plastic, paper, card, metal, glass, food and garden waste by 2026. Those are the key materials which are contained within the Environment Act, and Basildon already has access to those at curbside. Not all other Essex authorities do have that. So in terms of the level of response to those targets, about 48% felt they were about right, and then 28% on top of that would have preferred more ambitious targets, with decreasing numbers following on from there. So I think that 28% of people were encouraging us to be working, pushing towards those further and having greater ambitions, but there is obviously, there would obviously be likely costs and further system changes to do that. So what colleagues at Essex will be doing as alongside waste collection authorities over the coming weeks will be to refine and take on board the feedback from the consultation and decide how that's refined further prior to adoption. So in terms of the insights from the consultation so far, again, good level of agreement on all key proposals. Agreement with the proposal to use energy from waste is high, but citing the area and environmental impacts being areas of concern that were flagged up, and that was something which was flagged up as part of the Basildon specific response as Basildon Borough Council as well. So we did feed that back around the location of that. Reducing the use of landfill had high support from respondents. There was some feedback around affordability of the strategy and the impact on council tax, remaining important to residents. Again, the total burden of waste collection and disposal falls upon council taxpayers, and it's important to have that consideration there. The vision of a zero waste county was misunderstood by many residents, and that's something that we will be taking back on board as a partnership. There was a question around anaerobic digestion, which was something which there wasn't the level of knowledge around that, so there will need to be an education piece around what anaerobic digestion is and how that can be helpful to process certain types of organic wastes. Big area of feedback was around residents wanting manufacturers and retailers to take greater responsibility and easy to use recycling services. That's something which, again, there is an expectation that as a partnership we would use our collective powers to influence and shape and help to feedback and communicate what is happening in terms of packaging and particularly with changes to come to things like the deposit return scheme, extended producer responsibility. All of those things which are likely to come in and you're going to be hearing a lot more about in the next couple of years are going to have an impact on the way and the type of waste that we produce in the household. So I think it's important to make sure that we continue to communicate and tell that story. But there was a strong agreement to the principle of councils working in collaboration. But to go back to the earlier point, there is still a clear sovereignty over the way in which a waste collection authority will meet some of the legislative targets. So that's in there. Alongside the draft strategy, there is a strategic environmental assessment, which received 275 responses. Again, significant number of those responses were from Basildon, 70 of the 275. The statutory respondents indicated that the draft strategic environmental assessment was broadly acceptable, but there was a bit of a split as to whether it correctly identified the significant effects of the draft strategy. So there was a bit of a split there. So there'll be some further exploration required to understand that. So the consultation report response was independently analysed. The draft report was published for that. Essex Waste Partnership Councils will work together to review and consider the consultation response to bring together quantitative and qualitative feedback. And I was at a meeting at County Hall today with members across Essex to receive this feedback. So today is a timely date to be coming to talk to you about this. What we will do as a partnership is reflect upon the changes which came back on the consultation and understand where changes and amendments are likely to be needed prior to a future decision which would be required for Basildon to join up to the revised joint waste strategy for Essex, but that would be subject to a future decision. Now we are looking at proposing a phased approach to that across Essex. That will all depend on our own decision timescales. Currently it's on the forward plan for Basildon for the new municipal year. Likelihood is I think most authorities are looking at this around July time, with Essex adopting it in June. But there is obviously that would be subject to a future decision to adopt that. And here is what the timeline looks like in terms of the next steps for the programme. So you can see February 24, Essex County Council's got Scrutiny committee to review the public responses. That is a public session, and they will publish the draft consultation report. The member board will approve the direction of travel on this, and then there will be a requirement for Basildon as the Waste Collection Authority to endorse the direction of travel and to adopt this at some point in the future. Again, that's earmarked currently for July of this year. So I think that I've got a couple of questions there, but I'm happy to go back to, if I stop sharing, I can pass back to yourself, Chairman, and if there are any questions of members tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insightful report. Before I open up questions to our lovely group here, I'd just like to emphasise the point that this is about the Essex waste strategy and not perhaps particular nuances within our own borough that might come up as part of this. I would ask everyone here to just focus on the substantive here, and if we could avoid long-winded side tangents on local waste things we might have an issue with, we might all have an issue with. That'd be great. So thank you very much. So with that said, are there any questions? Councillor Yacoub.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up the point around the vision of a zero-waste county being misunderstood by respondents. I understand at the moment we're being presented the quantitative data, and I think it is hard to scrutinise just based on that. And I think it would be really good to have at least a collation of comments or keywords used for us to be able to understand what residents are thinking about this in more detail. But some kind of further discussion around that would be really good. I think with strategies like this, they're a huge undertaking. And this is a very high level document, and I understand that we have this process and we're going to be going through, quite a few measures before we adopt it. But I think it's really important that we take into account the day-to-day impact this does have on a resident and their lives. And that's why, Councillor Gascoigne, I don't think it's, as simple to say, let's separate this from local issues that are currently taking place, because as it was said in the briefing of this report, we have implemented some of these goals. And I think a lot of us around this room agree that these are really important goals for the environment. But we also understand that at the moment, the delivery of these goals, particularly around the recycling sacks, which we still currently don't know, what are the solutions on that. We know we've been told that there's going to be new bags, but what's the process going to be? We know that there's been a failure of actually rolling out a pilot with the current reusable sacks and ensuring that it actually is a system that works. So if we're going to do this again, after we've wasted a significant amount of taxpayers' money, it needs to be done in the right way. And again, we don't have that information. We haven't been told anything, in relation to that. So I think it's really important that we do understand that where this is a high-level strategy for all of Essex, which is great, we need to always bring it back to how does this impact our residents on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Councillor Yacoub. Councillor Blake.
Just on that last point, I would suggest Councillor Yacoub actually goes online and looks at the council meeting that she didn't attend the other day, where I'd done about, for me, an enormously long speech of about 4 or 5 minutes, where it pointed out some of the details that she's actually mentioned, what process we're going to do with these bags, etc. It's all in there. All you've got to do is go online and listen to it.
Okay, so far we're kind of managing to mainly stick to the substantive, so well done. Any other questions about the strategy itself or impact? Councillor McGeorge.
Thank you, Chair. Now, obviously, this is an Essex thing that we are sort of being consulted on, so I'm assuming that it will be mostly Essex that are compiling the strategy as such. Does this affect, as it's an Essex-wide and obviously all the boroughs are involved, will the different boroughs then sort of change their collection strategies to be more in line with each other so that different boroughs are doing it the same or differently, or does it actually have any effect on that, or is it a case of Essex will tell us what the goals are and all the different boroughs can do as they see fit, if that's what makes sense?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. So the idea is that this is replacing and refreshing the current strategy which exists, and it is very much a partnership. Basildon's part of the inter-authority agreement partnership, which puts us on an equal footing, now understanding that as a collection authority, we can't operate without a disposal authority and vice versa. So we do need to work hand in hand together on this. What the revised strategy does do is it gives collection authorities the autonomy over the way in which they reach the targets, and there may be times when we might want to collaborate with others on various trials or anything else, but it does give us sovereignty over the way in which we collect. But a lot of what's within here is around the legal targets, and I think that I don't think we can downplay the work that Basildon's put in over the last 5 years to get to the point where we're almost ahead of the place, and we've adopted a lot of the things that Essex is only now considering and some of our partner authorities are only now discussing. So I think that we are ahead of the curve because of the groundwork that we've put in over the last 5 years to adopt some of those targets. But ultimately, it does allow for sovereignty on a collection authority basis over the way in which we manage our own waste.
Okay, so I have a few questions. under here we have on page 86, it says we will send no more than 10% of waste to landfill by 2035. Are you able to advise what the current landfill is? What is our current percentage going to landfill?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think that I will bring Councillor Blake in for part of this response. But there is, if you take, for example, what we've got at the moment, previous years we were having a recycling rate of around 44%. That would mean 56% of our material going to landfill. Landfill, as we know, is a treatment method which has a limited shelf life. There are new landfill sites aren't opening up. The landfill sites that are there are filling up, and if I pass back to Councillor Blake, he'll be able to give us a bit more of an update on the number, percentage recycling rate from the recent service changes. Thank you.
Yeah, this is more or less hot off the press, and it's just to show that it is working. Last December, our recycling rate was 41%. This December, it was 58%. That is impressive by anyone's standards, and we should be shouting that from the rooftops. Yes, we're having issues still with the bag, we know that, but this just shows it's working. We've made the right decision to do it. That is truly amazing. And I know it goes down to a lot of hard work by the officers and the crews out there. And more importantly, and just importantly, the general public out there who are going through hard times with the bag. We know that, and they're coming back to us and saying, we're doing all we can. Can we do a little bit more? And we will. But it just goes to show the residents out there, the huge majority of them are making this a success along with the decisions that we've made here. So, you know, I can't praise them enough. But I will also say, those who are still not abiding by it, we will be coming after you. And I can be reported to the Standards Board again for saying that. We really will. For those who are not abiding by it and just putting their bags out willy-nilly, we will be there looking for you.
Thank you very much. And I suppose that is one of the big challenges, is that what do we want? We've got to balance, obviously, the needs of our residents, which obviously top priority, but at the same time, this new outcome of very, very high recycling rates is something to be very proud of, and I know our residents really want as well. Difficult balancing act, I have to say. Okay, so the next question is to do with the same page, to do with the aims. So, for example, here under waste disposal, quite literally under what I've just read, we aim to send zero waste to landfill by 2030. Now, the ones with the bullseye and the arrow in it, I know are government legislation. So that's the government target set. What about the triple star kind of aims? What happens if we don't quite manage to meet those aims to send zero waste to landfill by 2030?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think that they are the aspirations. They are recognising the limitations of the time that's left on the existing landfill and capacity within Essex and neighbouring authorities, neighbouring counties. There is as landfill becomes scarcer, the cost increases as well. So I think it's worth flagging up that the cost of that will increase exponentially. And also it is just mean it's burying stuff in a hole in the ground. It's not generating energy. It's not doing anything to capture that material. So you will be looking at potentially fighting over more and more scarce resources and scarce capacity for that material, increased costs, and having to ship that stuff, transfer it further away from the source, which obviously goes against some of the key principles which underpin a lot of our environmental legislation in this country about trying to manage the material close to the point it's produced as possible. So we could run the risk of shipping it halfway across the country for massively increased cost, massively increased carbon footprint. So it's about trying to manage the material. Obviously, the ideal thing, and higher up the waste hierarchy, you've got prevention, you've got reuse, you've got recycling. So it's about driving that material up there so you've got less of that stuff to deal with in the first place. All of the things we've spoken about tonight, particularly including the extended producer responsibility scheme, which is due to come in soon, will help to drive that material up the waste hierarchy.
So just to clarify, just so that I'm 100% certain, good aim. If we fail to meet the aim are there any, for example, financial consequences for us as a I mean, obviously there's a financial consequence because it's expensive to send it to landfill, but as in, will an external body, will Essex County Council turn up and then kick down our door and go, give me my money for failing to meet these aims? Something like that, and just trying to look at sort of consequences. Besides consequences of not hitting our aims, are there any other consequences?
Well, Essex County Council have just turned up to give us that exact message. So I'm going to defer to Jason. You already? Can you do that straight off the bat?
Sorry, could you just...
Yeah, so we have a lovely aim here to send zero waste to landfill by 2030. And the query is, if we don't meet that aim as a borough, what happens? Will Essex County Council start holding us to ransom? Will I get nasty letters? Or are there other damning consequences that we'd rather not face?
No, there are no penalties if you weren't able to meet that. But again, we need to recognise the statutory functions for the collection authorities and county councils as disposal authorities. So Essex County Council is ultimately responsible for dealing with the residual waste streams. So the decisions in terms of where that waste goes sits with the county council. So it's very much our target to reach in terms of ensuring that any of that black bag waste that's generated by district, borough, city councils is appropriately dealt with, and we'll be looking to put in place arrangements which meant that we don't send that to landfill.
And I think, if I may, Chairman, as well, the other thing which does tie into this is some of the wording around in the legislation under the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme requires us as a collection authority to provide a collection service that is meets a number of criteria, including being environmentally practicable and sustainable as well. So we would need to make sure that we are collecting in a way which is meeting best practice in order to attract potentially those funding sources further down the road. So it's the risk of harm of not doing it is greater than landfilling everything. So I think it's worth saying these are commitments, there are aspirations, there are legal targets, but there are also potential funding sources to come through things such as EPR further down the road.
Yes, I suppose a nice way of looking at it is an opportunity for us. Okay, Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence, because of course I'm not actually technically a member of the committee, but I wanted to ask the question, do we actually think it's attainable to completely stop sending anything to landfill? Obviously, if you're going to set an aspiration, you might as well aim high. But obviously, like most people in the room, I suspect, I have seen a big reduction in what I'm putting in my black sacks, what the residual waste that I have left over once I've taken out my food waste and my recycling. But obviously, I do get to a point where I've got certain things that aren't recyclable and that have to go in my black sack. Where do we envision that waste going in the future, if not to landfill?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor, for your question there. So I think I was at, as I said, I was at Essex County Council today. Had a very interesting presentation from Malden District Council, who are running a trial of soft plastic recycling at curbside, which is a material which the officers from Malden were reporting isn't very heavy in terms of weight, but it's quite bulky in terms of capacity within their residual waste, and they will be feeding back the results of that trial into DEFRA, and I think the anticipation is that will be rolled out across all collection authorities at some point in the future as well. So we're waiting to hear more about that, because that will take a lot of that bulky material out of our residual waste and move that into either a recycling stream, or ideally what would happen is some things like that will start to be designed out, and we're seeing a lot more of that with packaging at the moment. With you'll see it with plastic bottles and things where the lids will be attached to the bottle because they're made of the same polymer, so they can be easily recycled, rather than having loads of different types of plastic at the curbside. You'll have a much narrower range which can be easily recovered, and that starts to move those materials into a recycling stream. The other thing that I think will be interesting to see when this rolls out is the introduction of a deposit return scheme. So that is something which is being trialled in Scotland at the moment, but that puts a levy onto some single-use containers with the ambition of moving those back out of the waste collection stream and into increasing recovery of those, and that's been shown to have worked in a number of countries around the world. So I think that there are interesting things which are going to be coming over the next few years which will help to change the way in which the type of waste we produce in the household and the way in which we manage it. I know a wine bottle is about 18% lighter than it was 15 years ago, and that's down to the manufacturers working hand in glove with the reprocessors to make sure that there's a good quality material. And we're seeing it in Basildon. We're seeing much better quality material at curbside. We're seeing much less contamination. That is obviously a better material for us to sell back into the market. So all of those things tie together.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just add a little bit to the other points that James raised? There is certainly scope to increase the amount of recycling. I think we can all agree that there is more that can be done. So we can certainly reduce the amount of waste that sits in the residual waste bin. But there will always be something sitting in the residual waste bin. I think we all accept that we're not going to be able to recycle everything. To do so would require a significant shift, not just in participation, but also in the technology to be able to deal with waste. So there will be something in the black sacks that will need to be disposed of. The target for zero waste to landfill is going to be tough, but it is a target that can be achieved. We recognise that actually the government legislation is very much moving us away from landfill anyway. There's not going to be, it's not a long-term solution to deal with waste. The availability of landfills is now significantly reduced within the county. We're not seeing new landfills being set up. So there will need to be other solutions to deal with the black bag waste. And the strategy as being proposed is identifying energy from waste as the appropriate and viable solution for dealing with the black bag waste. But as I say, what we're looking to do through the strategy is significantly reduce the amount of black bag waste that needs to be dealt with, and that's primarily the first sort of point within that strategy around reducing waste, increasing recycling, and therefore reducing the amount that needs to be dealt with as black bag waste.
Lovely, and do you know what? I'm going to be an idealist here and say let's go for 100% recycling. We will get rid of those black sacks. Idealist, I admit. Okay, so there's a couple of people who want to speak now. Councillor Allen.
People remember years ago, and the rubbish all went en masse to some recycling point, onto a conveyor belt, and there were pickers along the conveyor belt picking all the different things out. And I've had comments from several residents that the council are now asking us to do the picking. It's recommended to be quite a smelly old job picking off the conveyor belt, and they're saying, well, we've now got to pick and put 6 or 7 bins, doing the separation ourselves. And furthermore, Councillor Baker's mentioned tonight that we're going to enforce on that. So on page 86, the column of aspirations there, the last one reads quite innocuously, "We will ensure that all Essex residents have access to comprehensive recycling services for plastic, paper and card, etc." But actually, what we should be saying, that all Essex residents have access to and shall carry out comprehensive recycling services. Because we've already mentioned tonight that we're going to enforce, get out there and say, look, you're not recycling. And so I think that's a bit of some of these comments in here are quite simplified and innocuous. In other words, if Preston was to say, see this, Essex residents must carry out comprehensive recycling services and separate them, which is what we're asking them to do. And people have said to me, why have we all got six containers? That should all go to the county council or wherever and separate them. So that's a comment. If anyone wants to comment back on that.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you for your comment. Well, I mean, seeing as you're here.
About innocuous statements. On page 85, for example, everybody can like a vision and circular accommodate, all the headings on page 85. Reuse, recycling, recovering, anaerobic digestion. Well, I don't know what that means, but maybe that should be a good thing. Energy from waste. Well, yes, of course we want energy from waste. Can you explain what anaerobic digestion actually what's the feedstock and what does it produce? And on the energy from waste, does this actually mean incineration of waste, or incineration of unrecyclable waste, which of course might not get the approval that's on this band line?
Okay, so there were kind of multiple questions there. I'm going to resist answering the one about anaerobic digestion because I did that in my masters, but I'm going to hand over to the powers that be. If you could, well, particularly anaerobic digestion, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll take each point in turn, Councillor, and I think that the piece that you mentioned in the presentation and the report from tonight is the legislative target to have comprehensive access to each of those materials at the curbside. So that's what it's saying. Below that, at a waste collection authority level, is we decide how that's collected and we decide our policy around education and enforcement. So there is a local policy that sits below that as well. Anaerobic digestion is a material where is a process where organic material is processed without oxygen, so anaerobic, without air. What it does is it produces energy and it produces a fertilizer type material as well. So you get two byproducts for a result of that, but it needs organic material to go into it to be processed under that. And in terms of energy from waste, I think that there are Basildon, in terms of its response to the consultation, stated as an authority that whilst we understand the importance and prevalence of energy from waste, that there were significant concerns locally around the siting of any facility in the future. So we did feed that back to the consultation as an authority, and that was something that our residents echoed as well. But there are a number of different treatment methods which incorporate energy from waste. So there's kind of like an umbrella term which covers a number of different technologies.
Lovely stuff. Thank you for the clarity on that. Councillor McGeorge.
Thank you. To be fair, I think some of mine has actually just sort of been covered. In regards to the zero waste to landfill, there is always going to be things that have to go to landfill, unfortunately. I mean, clothes, for example, there are clothes that you cannot donate anywhere because they're ruined. They are, unfortunately, going to end up in the bin. Now, I know the energy from waste and the incinerators has just been mentioned as something that would potentially be a way of stopping the waste to go to landfill. Will it come out in the strategy to what the options would be to stop the landfill, or will that come out sort of at a later date? Do we know?
So if we go back to the initial statement that's sitting within the strategy around zero waste to landfill. So landfill is obviously a form of disposing of waste. And there are a number of different disposal options. So energy from waste is another way in which you can dispose of waste. So what we're suggesting within the strategy is that we cease using landfill and instead we use energy from waste to deal with those unrecyclable materials. Now, the energy from waste process obviously is a form of combustion. So it's combusting that material and it's destroying that material but producing energy as a byproduct of that. There is some outputs from an energy from waste facility, so there's the ash that's produced, but that ash can also go off for recycling. So you do get that point that you actually have an energy from waste facility that has no outputs that need to go into landfill. So if you think about your entirety of your waste stream, you've got the materials you're collecting for recycling, you've got materials you're collecting for composting. What's left goes into an energy from waste facility which produces energy, and the byproduct of that can also, the ash, can go off for recycling. So you end up with that situation where you actually have no material going into landfill, and that's what the strategy is proposing as an overarching solution for dealing with waste across the county. And as James mentioned, the strategy itself is looking at those sort of targets, aspirations, what the parameters are for dealing with waste. It doesn't deal with the detail of whether waste infrastructure is needed or where that waste infrastructure may be located. Those will be things that will happen later on in the process following adoption of the strategy.
And just to clarify on that point before I bring in the next question, let's say we did go for the energy from waste as our thing. I mean, like I say, my ideal is 100% recycling, but we don't have to build anything in our own borough, though, do we? We can send it to an adjacent location or somewhere else in Essex. So we're not necessarily, by wanting to go for that kind of strategy, we don't have to have an incinerator anywhere here in our borough if we don't want to. And presumably there are other options across Essex where it could be sent instead. Is that correct?
So yes, that's absolutely correct. But again, when we look at the decisions around what happens to black bag waste, that is a statutory function of the county council. Of course, you know, we are part of a waste partnership, and there is that discussion that happens across the partnership. But in the sense of where those statutory functions sit, disposal sits with the county council. So ultimately, the decision around where or whether facilities are needed to deal with that black bag waste reside with the county council. In the same way that decisions around how waste is collected and the collection regimes you have for recycling from households sits very firmly with the borough council. But you're absolutely right. You know, there's no necessity for a facility that sits within each individual borough. And you know, there's although there is a preference to have regional capacity, so we're dealing with our waste within the county. Again, there's no reason why waste couldn't be moved out of county for treatment. But again, those will be decisions that will take place after the overarching policy around how we treat waste is agreed and is approved.
Thank you very much. Councillor Blake.
Yeah, just to answer Councillor Allen's question a little while ago about the conveyor belt and everyone's sorting it, and now why are we doing it? I understand what you're saying, but at the end of the day, there is a cost saving to that. And what was also happening with the pink bags that were going, we were getting, you know, as well as them being sorted, there was also about a 13% contamination rate. So we was literally getting nothing for, you know, so it was actually, we're paying somebody to do our waste and not getting anything back at all. But now, as I mentioned at the full council meeting, if they want to go online and listen to it again, they can hear it again. Those who didn't turn up will actually see that we made that point that the contamination now is not zero, but it's well down. So there's, you know, and that saves us money, which means we can keep the services that we've actually got, and we can produce such a good budget that we did the other night.
Thank you, Councillor Blake. Councillor Yacoub.
Thank you. I'm allowed to go on holiday, Councillor Blake, and in fact, it actually sounds like you could use one. Anyway, as much as I enjoyed that snarky remark, my question wasn't actually answered. I'm really keen to know whether further analysis will be provided once the qualitative data is looked at, because I think it's an important part of the consultation. Another insight I wanted to pick up was the point made here that respondents want manufacturers and retailers to take greater responsibility to ease, you know, recycling. And I think that's a fair point. And that is, you know, a pretty common sentiment amongst many residents. Is there anything that we're doing with this insight as part of this strategy? And how are we working with manufacturers to tackle some of these things? For example, packets of crisps can't be recycled at the moment. And so these are all things that, again, if you look at our target on having zero waste going to the landfill, something needs to be done about things like that. So.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your question, Councillor. So I'm happy to, colleague from Essex has just advised that the full consultation report is available now. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that gets circulated alongside the minutes, particularly in terms of crisp packets and things like that. I know that there's some really good, I was reading earlier this week that Pringles are coming up with a fully recyclable Pringles can. So there's lots of work happening in that space. That's all ahead of what's coming in with the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme in a couple of years' time. So I think you're going to see more changes to the type of products that you buy over the next couple of years to slim down and homogenise the types of packaging that you see, including, I know that the fully recyclable Pringles can coming soon. Other crisps are available, I should probably say. So, yeah.
Lovely stuff. Okay, well, I think we're pretty much drawing to an end there. I just wanted to make sure that we're 100% crystal clear on this whole aims thing. So let's say hypothetically we as a as a council go, yeah, we're 100% in. This strategy is our strategy. We're buying into this. We love it. Thumbs up, triple thumbs up, whatever. Can this be used at a later point, because we've opted into the strategy, to then say, right, well, you've opted into the strategy, so now you've got to have this thing that may be perceived as detrimental to your residents. So hypothetically, let's say the new, part of the waste strategy is now everyone has to have 15 different bags for 15 different individual bits of waste. And then you go, oh, well, you opted into the strategy, so now everyone has to have 15 different bags for waste. Is that something that could happen as a result of us, adopting this strategy, et cetera, What kind of, essentially, is there anything as part of this that we could be coerced, forced into doing? Or is it simply an aspirational aim that gives us the positives if we meet them, but if we fail to meet them, then, oh well, never mind, better luck next time?
I think, Chairman, to answer that, we've been part of the way in which this has been written since the beginning, and we've been at every meeting to help write and shape this. So we've been part of the conversations throughout. You will see language in there that is consistent, if not very much the same as Basildon's strategy, because we've done a lot of the legwork locally and been part of this. The way in which this has always worked has been based upon partnership and understanding that like I said, we are the collection authority, Essex is the disposal authority, and there are a number of other collection authorities working together in partnership towards the aspirations within here, which are also echoed either by legislative commitments or by what's in our own waste strategy. So there are a lot of things within this which you'll see reflect the journey that Basildon's been on, what our own commitments are and what our aspirations are for the borough. But coming back to the point which was made by ourselves and a number of other collection authorities is that ultimate sovereignty over collection methods should remain with the Waste Collection Authority. So ultimately we decide how we want to collect and the way in which we want to collect and serve our residents.
And just to be clear on that point, I think, just to answer the question you raised, there's nothing within the strategy that could undermine the decisions of Basildon Borough Council in terms of how you collect your waste. That is still a sovereign issue that sits with this authority. Just to put those minds at rest, there's nothing in here that could be used to say, you suddenly need 15 sacks and collect it in a certain way. That decision and that process still sits with your authority.
Thank you very much for that clarity. All right, okay. So in that case then, do you want to hit your microphone? In that case, we will draw this particular section to a close. Thank you very much. And we'll move now on to, because we changed the order, so that's item 7 complete. We'll now move on to item 4, Q3, Housing Repairs and Planned Works Performance Report. That's pages 5 to 19. And I'll hand over to the relevant officer. And special thanks to our friends from County Council for answering our questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to introduce the item and then hand over to my colleagues. So just a reminder for members really that I instigated a review back in 2022 and that was concluded almost 12 months ago now. Very broad review, included staff, customers and elected members, and wasn't just paying lip service. It really gave people an opportunity to give true and honest feedback on how they found the service, and that was taken into account and put into an action plan which came to scrutiny last July, and I promised to come back early in 2024, which is what we're doing this evening. Work has been progressing really well, and ultimately the aim has been to run a much more efficient service and to improve the customer experience. And we've had some structural changes in terms of Morgan Sindall and their management team, and in the council we've set up a dedicated disrepair team in that time. So we've got Andy Riley with us today. He's the regional director. Harris from Morgan Sindall, and he's the regional director, relatively new to not to the organisation but to us in Basildon, and we've got some other new personnel at Morgan Sindall as well. So I'm going to hand over to Jonathan Tissard, head of service, and Andy to talk you through the report and the performance.
Thanks, Leslie. So to remind Scrutiny of activity over the past few months. We meet monthly with an operational group meeting attended by stakeholders from the Council and Morgan Sindall, and a strategic group also meets with stakeholders from both areas every month. There's a weekly council officer meeting to look at complaints and what action is being taken by whom. We also meet monthly to look at housing ombudsman and stage 2 complaints, and obviously more often when required. As Leslie's just said, we've got Andy Harris in the regional director role and Mark Whittam into the role of regional marketing managing director. We've had really encouraging meetings with both, and I'm really pleased at their commitment to continuing and building on our partnership. Looking at more operational matters, we've recently tweaked the complaints procedure to ensure we get Morgan Sindall involved much earlier, so they have immediate sight of the complaint. Morgan Sindall are now immediately call the complainant when the complaint is first received. I'm very keen to track this and ensure that all complainants are called as soon as the complaint is received, as we know from the excellent service design customer survey that was undertaken last year that our residents want and demand better communication, and this initial call goes a long way in reducing that distress. I'll report on the success of this at our next presentation. Morgan Sindall have also introduced something called Help Me Fix. This is an online video-based system that connects residents to tradespeople. This means simple fixes can be done immediately, saving us time and improving service levels. We'll report on this on the success at the next presentation, but anecdotally, Andy's just told me that of half the cases that Help Me Fix has just taken, the issue was resolved there and then, which is great news. In terms of service delivery, I'm really pleased to report that the number of days taken to complete repairs continues to improve, as do many of the other performance indicators. We are seeing more disrepair cases coming in every day, and it is now urgent that we bolster our disrepair team and how we actually respond to these cases, as compensation levels are high. We are looking at different options, including hiring a dedicated housing lawyer to work within the disrepair team, or using alternative dispute resolution to deal with these cases. I'm kicking off a restructure of my service as well to ensure that we have the technical skills to deal with the cases in the most efficient way possible. Customer satisfaction with repairs is generally very high, but we know there are still cases that go wrong, and we are determined to get better at responding quickly and effectively where this happens. We continue to work closely with our excellent CRC colleagues to finesse the complaints procedure, and with Morgan Sindall to respond as quickly as possible where issues arise. I think to summarise, things are going well. There's still work to be done on finessing processes, investigating where things go wrong, and in generally improving the image and reputation of our service. The planned restructure will definitely help, and the medium-term goal of getting a new asset management system and updating processes around this will really drive efficiencies and improve customer service. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Well, I think this is going to be a hot topic, I think. So we'll start off with Councillor Schrader.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is the second performance report to come before your committee, and as members know, the strategic asset management contract with Morgan Sindall is an exceptionally large contract. It's got a lot of moving parts to it. When I took on the housing portfolio in 2021, housing repairs was already quite a hot button issue, and that's certainly continued to be the case throughout the time I've been the cabinet member, and I know repairs dominates a lot of councillors' inboxes. It certainly does mine. That was why we initiated a comprehensive service review, and members will doubtless recall the first performance report, which came before you in July last year. Hopefully, the report before you this evening demonstrates that the direction of travel continues to move in the right direction. Ultimately, as it sets out in our corporate plan, it is our aim to ensure we offer a high quality of life for all of our residents. We've set high expectations of our repair service, and we've been robust with MSPS when we felt they've not been meeting those expectations. But to be fair to MSPS, I have to say, when it comes to driving service improvement, in my experience, we've very much been pushing against an open door. MSPS have engaged positively with the review, and I do think there is a shared commitment between both the Council and MSPS to improve performance, streamline processes and structures with better governance arrangements, greater transparency and accountability, and to win the hearts and minds of our tenants. I think there's a general acceptance that there's still more that could be done better. Mr. Tizard mentioned communication as an example that comes up again and again. I hope we've set in motion a rolling programme of continuous improvement, and scrutiny by this committee is very much part of that process. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you for your comment, Councillor Schrader. Councillor Yacoub.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. So what I will do is I'll ask them one at a time, if that's okay. So just picking up the repairs reporting portal, what specific improvements are being considered for this? And how does the usage of the portal by 25% of the customers compare to previous periods and industry benchmarks?
Good evening, I'm Nick Eady, I'm the Repairs Support Manager in John Tizard's team. We don't have specific data about the portal usage available, I'm afraid. I'm happy that we can get it without too much difficulty, but I don't have it available this evening, sorry.
If I may add a bit of detail, we are looking at introducing this more and more. It's been a phased approach. We haven't rolled it out. We haven't advertised it too heavily either because it wasn't ready technically to take a large volume of traffic, but it is something we will do in the future. But at the moment it was just about getting the phone lines sorted, and the response on the phones is the main way of contacting at this point in time.
Thank you for that. Picking up the proactive communication piece with tenants and leaseholders, this is something that we've spoken about several times, and it's a sentiment again that many residents have shared with councillors around poor communication. There was mention in the report around an operational delivery group. Can you give more information around the roles and responsibilities of the operational delivery group, and also what strategies will be put into place to make sure that there are no communication delays in the future, or that it is reduced significantly?
Yeah, definitely. So this group's obviously the main stakeholders, on the people on the ground, I should say, rather than the senior leadership team. And we get together and we talk about all the issues around repairs and maintenance. A lot of the time it's around staffing, for example, as adequate numbers. Do we need to increase it? Are we talking to each other efficiently? And just trying to work out best practice with everybody in the room. I'm also thinking about bringing the Morgan Sindall guys at Barleyland back to the Bat Centre if there's room, to increase that communication and ensure that we are working closely together. And that's not just with the operational guys, it's with wider housing teams and other teams in the council. Because at the moment they are very disparate because they are Barleylands. So yeah, it's really about just getting everybody in the room and talking through all the issues and getting it out in the air.
Thank you. Another thing I wanted to pick up on was the You Said We Did campaign. I think campaigns like this can be quite hit and miss. I'm quite cautious about campaigns like this because on the surface they appear to be quite well intentioned, but there is a risk of residents feeling like the council is quite dismissive or even kind of condescending. I think about the Reels campaign that took place whilst we were implementing the new waste system, which was talking all about the new waste system, how it was going to change recycling, how it was revolutionary, and then we had members of the public commenting underneath it going, what are you talking about? This is not our reality. And I think for that reason, it is important if we're going to have a campaign like this, which I assume will be on social media and will follow a very kind of similar routine of putting things out. Oh, you said this, we did that. That's great. But when there's a resident on there that's been waiting for 6 weeks for their repair, watching that's not going to be very reassuring for them. So I think campaigns like this are more effective when they come from a very kind of genuine space of recognizing we're doing this right, but we've still got all of this to do. And if we do campaigns like this, can we have someone who will be responding to residents who, who reply on there and say, this isn't what's happening in my situation? Because I think it's a really poor show as a council when we put something up on our social media page and, there are residents struggling who are commenting underneath and their comments are either hidden or not responded to. That's something that I'd be quite concerned about in relation to this campaign.
Yeah, noted your comments, yeah, and obviously there's probably more to do around the comms and the repairs. So yeah, that's definitely something we'll take away.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the emergency repairs, has there been any investigation into the reasons for the high volume of emergencies during Q3? And were these emergencies preventable?
I mean, we get a lot of emergencies in and around winter. Obviously after a storm, we will get a lot of roofing, fencing, etc. And you will not get hold of a roofer for a week after a storm, for example. Andy can probably give you a lot more detail, but there are, especially in winter, especially around burst pipes, cold weather, you will get a lot of emergency calls.
Just to add to that slightly, yeah, we're sort of getting up around 30% of emergencies, which is very high if you look at historic performance across repairs. And so there's a number of things. First of all, in that quarter, we did have sort of 4 or 5 named storms. So there's quite a lot of boundaries and roofings and so on like that. So that had a massive impact. But also the volumes of reported, I think, it's much more front and centre with regards to government advice and things like that, and there's a great deal of sort of awareness perhaps now compared to previously as to what constitutes an emergency. So we're finding a lot more people are fully aware of that now.
In terms of the gas compliance access challenges, it was cited that a lot of the times when we're not able to keep up with that, it's when tenants haven't provided us access. So do we know if there's any specific kind of barriers that tenants are facing that result in this? Are there any underlying reasons, such as scheduling conflicts or just communication issues that are contributing towards this?
There's usually a whole variety of reasons with non-access. It could be somebody's gone into care for a long period of time, within hospital, it could be prison, it could be a whole range of things, or particular illness. So that's why we start the process so early, to take that into account. But we obviously, clearly, there are real people that we're dealing with. There are still some difficulties, but it's a real positive direction of travel. The guys have done a really amazing job over recent weeks and months in terms of getting access to those more difficult properties and having to take the required legal action earlier where necessary, because whatever the circumstances are, the health and safety of that individual tenant and obviously the broader neighbourhood is absolutely paramount, and that we have to get in to do those gas safety checks on an annual basis. So yeah, there's very, very robust processes in place, but obviously, as I say, there's human element involved in that, so those cases will always have some complexities around them.
Just finally from me, on the disrepair claims, have we seen any kind of patterns or commonalities emerge amongst these disrepair claims that we could target and look to kind of tackle?
There's a bit of a pattern emerging in disrepair claims where the case is usually initiated by a claims firm generating business that in a proportion of cases there is no disrepair to be found. However, for a proportion of cases there is genuine disrepair. We do have an obligation to complete work, and there is quite a wide variety of issues that need to be addressed. No single issue, no, it's not all roofing or electrics or whatever. It's quite a broad range of work that's required. And in the cases where it's genuine, there's evidence that we've been aware of a repair, we haven't quite finished and resolved it yet, and the intervention of a claims firm promotes them to go a particular route, and we have some extra work to do as a result of that. The team that Leslie referred to earlier, there's a dedicated team now that works with Basildon Council's legal services, works with the contractor, and we aim to investigate those claims sharply, inspect the properties, get a comprehensive report, respond thoroughly to the claim, and in the event that we feel there is no claim to be made, we would aim to go the alternative dispute resolution route, which is essentially handling it as a complaint in-house, and we'll deal direct with the tenant, which in most cases works out better for all concerned.
All right, thank you for that. That was an impressive set of questions there. Okay, so Councillor McGeorge.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a lot shorter. Just on the performance indicators on page 17, do we know why there has been such a rise in complaints from December compared to November? We seem to have gone from 535 to 1,176, which is quite a sort of a significant jump. And just, I'm not expecting anyone to actually know the answer to this. Someone spent an hour and a half on the phone. Do we know why on earth they were on the phone for that long?
I'm speculating, but I think that might have been due to the new bin rollout, because those complaints aren't necessarily to do with property. If you see on the next line, we've only got 86 actually in December, which is our record low. So I've got the feeling that there might have been something else happening then. Sorry, Charles, but he's not here.
I can confirm that's exactly what it was. It's the corporate, so what we try to do is give an overview of the corporate position and how this contract's performing in line with that. So, yeah, that's why it was higher for that period. But as you can see, for Morgan Sindall, it's reduced.
Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on just a couple of points that were raised. Firstly, Councillor Yakub was talking about the reporting portal. I personally think that the portal is going to become more important in the future. I think there's, as Mr. Tizard said, there are some improvements that could be made to it, and it probably isn't ready to be the main source of contact. But I think in the long run, a bit like how we now have the Our Streets app for all the waste stuff, I think increasingly the portal is going to be something we want to promote. And Councillor McGeorge mentioned the call wait times. Certainly there has been a big job of work in recent years to try and address call wait times, because that was a really big issue, certainly in the early days. And we've now got a dedicated phone line for that, whereas I think previously residents were ringing the BAS centre, the generic number. And of course, we're trying to move some of the volume of calls away from the generic council number to what I called the repairs hotline. There are still issues with that because, as most organisations are finding, manning those phone lines is increasingly resource intensive. So if we can direct more traffic through the online reporting tools and that kind of thing, it takes a lot of the pressure off of those systems. The only other point I wanted to pick up on was the you said we did. Those kind of comm strategies are always difficult because obviously officers want to promote the good work that's being done, but she's absolutely right. A lot of the comments, and certainly I find it with my own comms, whenever I put anything on Facebook, almost the first 2 or 3 comments might be positive, but there's bound to be at least one person that will post some whataboutery. Like if I post that I feel, that we got a pothole down the road filled, they'll say, what about this pothole over here? So that's always a problem with those kind of strategies. But I still think it is worth publicising what's being done, because otherwise people have this impression that nothing is being done. But I do think that there is perhaps a question for officers to go away and consider, and she was right to raise it, about things not being picked up in the comments. Now, that may be a resource issue within the comms team, because obviously the people that are putting this stuff out across our social media channels are not necessarily equipped to follow up on repairs issues, etc. But it should be possible for someone within the relevant team to go in and pick those things up. That's my view anyway, but it may be a resource issue and a question of how we effectively manage those kind of comments, because obviously you would need to get more details off of the individual. Ultimately, they would be better off reporting it through some sort of online reporting tool. But hopefully, if we can get the portal into a good state, then the obvious solution would be to post a link to the portal and to invite the person to report the issue so that it can be investigated further. But I think it's a matter of getting all of our ducks in a row and getting those things aligned so we can roll that out. But I think in an ideal world, absolutely, if we're going to roll out a comm strategy like that, the ideal thing is to be able to pick casework or pick issues out of those comments so that they can be dealt with. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Schreider. Councillor Adam Weir.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'm looking at the data on page 17. I just have a few questions in terms of the performance indicators that we've got there. We've got number of calls abandoned, and that's has that reduced? It's reduced. However, it still seems like a high number. Why is that happening? Should I just ask my questions first? Okay, then the second question is the longest call waiting time, which is about 1 hour and 30 minutes in one instance. What is the current target? What are we trying to aim for, and why? I mean, what can be done to mitigate that? Then we've got.
Actually, is it worth answering those two, and then you do the next
Okay, then.
So, in answer to the first point, if you look at the actual volumes, it's certainly in November. If you compare them to the previous year, for example, you're talking 3,000 or 4,000 extra calls coming in. So we're resourced at a certain level, obviously, probably relating to the previous year. So, when you get a couple of name storms coming in and those sorts of issues, that has created a spike, which has created, obviously, these wait times. So it kind of answers both questions. But the volumes have been huge, and that's across the industry. Look at other contracts as well. It's very much got these spikes have happened both sides of the new year.
The question you haven't answered is the targets. What are the targets?
I don't know the targets off the top of my head here, but we could certainly pass them out with the minutes of this afterwards.
Yes, it would be meaningful to have it on the report so we know what we're comparing it to and seeing if the target is decreasing gradually.
Yeah, I'm sure between us we can put these on here for next time. I'm
particularly interested in the ombudsman inquiries. We've got two that went that far, what were those? What were the nature of those particular cases? If you
Leslie, on this one, is this more pertinent to the next part of the report? Those two.
That's a completely different matter.
Very good.
But I have brought those cases to a previous scrutiny. I can't remember the details of them, but we can go back through the previous agendas and find out what they were. Those cases were brought in detail. There was 8 or 9 cases in that report. I think it was last October, November time, and I reported on those and the cases and what we'd done about those specific cases.
and are they resolved now?
Yes, those cases were resolved.
Lovely stuff. Okay, so mine, maybe this is aimed at Morgan, maybe you, Andy Harris, not sure. So it's to do with, so generally we're seeing an improvement in the system, great news. Generally repairs are improving, great news, and we're looking at strategic changes which make it even better. All great stuff. However, inevitably people slip through the net, and I have some cases outstanding who have exactly had that. One resident comes to mind in particular who's now waited over 2 years for a complete set of repairs. What can you do for people who slip through the net, or for example fall in my resident's particular case where unfortunately 2 years outstanding on various different repairs? What can be done to help people like that, and what can be done to prevent people slipping through the net in future?
Thank you. 2 points there really is obviously when we get failures, like potentially you're describing there, it's making sure we analyse and just learn from them and accept that the errors have occurred, and as long as we can show we've learned, and you're not coming back in 6 months with a different resident who's got the same problem, that's the key to those. The other thing is we need to always keep our eye strongly on the ageing of our work in progress. And so it's not all about what's coming in at the front end over the telephones. It's about making sure that some of the more difficult cases that age in terms of works in progress are focused on, almost like a pincer movement, so that you're not getting a prevalence of these jobs either slipping through the net or being complicated and rolling on and so on. So mixture of learning the lessons, but also making sure we're looking at the older works, not just the easier to complete newer stuff.
So what's currently in place then for cases that are slipping with time? What would, what's the current process for identifying those and then potentially eliminating them?
So we obviously have our data systems, and we operate, or we publish on a daily basis to different members of staff certain jeopardy time frames. So, for example, if something looks as though it's going to slip out of target, then obviously one of the planners or somebody else on the team will pick these jobs up and make sure they're actioned. And it's the same at the other end, where they're looking to move from 60 to 90 just to cover those. So it's about managing the jeopardy and stopping things from moving forward. And that's sort of, if you've got a month's period and that last week you've got your identification of what jobs might move across. And so really it's using the data in a smart way in terms of what's actually coming up.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Councillor Allen.
There's some good, on page 12, there's some very good lines here. Repairs completed on first visit goes from 88% up to 94%, and similarly completed within 28 days moves from 85% to 95%, so that shows good progress down. As we go down to the gas one, midway down the bottom there, it's continuous at 99% of houses are dealt with by gas, which represents, I think, about 50 properties. The 1% is like 50 properties. And I just wonder whether you've got 50 properties, 50 addresses, where you've never been. So you've been to all, or you've done them all, what, these ones?
if it's an annual gas check, so we have to get into all of those properties on an annual basis. Where they've fallen out is where we've been unable to get that access within that 12-month period. So every day, more and more will fall out of the 12. You know, they'll fall out of their previous certificate, if you like. So it's an ongoing battle. Yes, we'll have been. We'll have been to everyone, and on those, that's what I was saying earlier. On very small number of cases, we have to take the tenant to court to get the access. Obviously, we can't just gain entry without a court order, so we go and get that through the court.
Recommended adopted for action. Remunerate Basildon for any council jobs charged. What's that about?
Yeah, so this is just where a job's been raised, but it was actually cancelled, but it's still gone through an invoice to the council on a price per property basis. So this is just from the financial consultants that we have looking at our data every year, and they'll say actually you need to make sure that the one or two that slip through, you make sure you don't do that in future, basically. So for example, someone phones up, there's a repair, but then it gets cancelled, but then we still got charged for it. It's just a small clerical error that we just need to make sure in future that we are double checking. Absolutely, we shouldn't be paying those. It's a very small percentage. It's de minimis, really. So quite simply, it's where a councillor has inquired about something to do with my service, rather than Paul's area or James' area. Quite simply, so it's just property services rather than the wider council.
Okay, lovely stuff. Right, well, in that case, I think we'll conclude item 4. Thank you very much to Andy Harris for paying us a visit. Nice to meet you, and we look forward to seeing these improvements we rolled out with our officers, so thank you for that. All right, so that would be item number 4 complete. So this brings us on to, I'm just thinking in terms of time, do you want to take a quick 10-minute break? You what, sorry? You're happy to push on. Is everyone happy to push on? You want some water? I'll tell you what then, why don't we do a 5-minute break then, and then we'll carry on just so people can get water, go to the toilet, and so on. Lovely. Okay. All right. So our meeting is now back in session. Welcome back, everybody. So we're now on agenda item 5. That's the Housing Ombudsman Spotlight on Management Agents Review. And I'll hand over to the relevant council officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So essentially, this was a determination from the Housing Ombudsman back in June last year, and the complaint was really around water ingress at a property. The council have we've got about 450 flats that we acquired following the stock transfer from the Commission for the New Towns back in 1994, and all of those flats are sited within blocks where the properties are privately owned, and we're the freeholder of the block. Each of those blocks has got a lease or a management agreement with a management company to fulfil all the management responsibilities and statutory obligations, and then each of the properties have got their own full or shared ownership lease, and they've got contractual obligation around maintaining the properties, and they pay a service charge for certain aspects to the block. We've got about 21 different management companies. Some of them are residential management companies, and they may have engaged managing agents for those blocks. So in this particular case, there was a dispute over some water ingress to the property, and a dispute who was responsible for sorting that out. The Ombudsman is not determining against the council in terms of that. That will be a matter for the lease. But it was really about the way that we handle and manage the complaint, in that we didn't react very well. We should have been a lot more proactive. As I say, the dispute was over the interpretation of the lease, about who ultimately was responsible for that repair. But he was disappointed, obviously, with the way that the residents' queries and complaints had been dealt with. The complaint goes back to November 2020, so it's a very old complaint now, and obviously you'll recall that we were in the midst of COVID then, and things were a little chaotic. So I'm not saying that was a reason for it. It's just a possibility. It's a long time ago now to ascertain the exact reasons. But basically, the complaint has come into the council and has been passed around a little bit. Didn't get to where it needed to go to, and as a consequence of that, the customer suffered a delay in getting the responses that they needed, and us being proactive, really. The Ombudsman has said to us, he's pointed us into the direction of a report, a spotlight report on managing agents, and that talks about how landlords should manage relationships with residents when there's a managing agent involved, and it talks about how the landlord should be very proactive in making sure that they've got that effective complaint management, communicating with residents, making sure residents know where they need to go to for different elements of that, and to make sure that it was handled within the complaints handling code. So obviously we hadn't done that, and that was why that they had found the issue with the council. So there's a number of actions that have taken place since that time. What I should say actually is that in terms of the number of contacts or complaints that we get in relation to those properties, it's very, very, very small numbers, something like 8 a year that we get, and obviously this is one where things have gone wrong. So we were asked to complete, as part of that, a self-assessment, which we have duly done, and that is attached to the enclosure 1 to the report, so you will see what those actions were. And I can sort of talk through really what we've done subsequent to that, if you'd like me to, in terms of the actions. So we've made sure now, so we've got we have Jill MacDonald with us tonight, who's the council's home ownership manager, and any complaints that come in relation to those properties go straight to that team now. So it's a dedicated point of contact, and we've made sure that that's been communicated to all staff. That's where those inquiries should go, and the guys know exactly what to do with them when they get there. All the frontline teams have been notified now. Just send it through to the home ownership team. I think probably I'm going to pause there and open it up for questions, Chair, if that's okay.
Okay, so in the order I've received them, Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. To be fair, I haven't much to add, so we can probably proceed to questions fairly quickly. But I would just say that, as Mrs. O'Shea has outlined, there are complex contractual relationships with third-party managing agents. And I think, you know, while the home ownership team generally have a good handle on things, it's acknowledged that there are improvements that could be made to the way in which we manage those relationships and contractual obligations with the management companies. I think the council's taken on board the deficiencies highlighted quite rightly by the Ombudsman decision in June. As Mrs. O'Shea says, we should have been more proactive, and I think that this report outlines how the council is going to set about addressing those. So obviously any feedback from colleagues is welcome. So yeah, we can move to the questions.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader. Councillor Yacoub.
Thank you. Look, I think this is quite an important report, and I'm quite concerned in seeing that some of the things that have been revealed here, for example, the fact that there was no procedures in place to monitor management companies' compliance with statutory obligations, such as confirming fire risk assessments and building insurance. The fact that there's been highlighting of the fact that a lot of the times frontline staff were quite unclear about these properties. I think these are worrying points that we need to kind of address more robustly than we are right now. I also think it's quite unacceptable that a database for storing information about these council properties is, you know, only now being developed at the back of this. I think, you know, this is an oversight that represents a significant incompetency on the part of the council. Proper management of these properties is very important, and so I would like to know what, you know, why has it taken this long for us to be able to consolidate a database like this, which seems to me that it's quite a simple process that should already be in place.
For the detail of what data we hold, I'd have to revert to Jill, and it's probably not appropriate to do that now. It's probably appropriate to go away and look at that and come back to you with a more full response about that. So we hold some data. What we haven't been is proactive in obtaining the compliance documents from those freeholders. And, you know, that's been in place for 30 plus years. It's been in place since 1994. So, and this is the first issue that's arisen in relation to it. So all we can do is hold our hands up and make sure that we put processes in place to make sure that that doesn't happen again. This is the first case in, you know, 30 plus years. So.
Just to follow up on that, especially around there being a lack of clarity in terms of the contractual relationship, that's something that has been picked up in other areas with the council. So, for example, you know, a particular community centre in which this was an issue in a report that came out. It seems to be a bit of a theme. What can we do to tackle this on a, you know, on a basis where, you know, all areas of the council, whatever contractual relationships we have, we're managing them effectively?
I think we have to look to the lease as to where those obligations lie, and obviously with any legal document it's always open to interpretation. So it's clear, the clarity is there, but where there is a dispute, obviously we would have to seek some guidance on that. But the documents are there and in place, so the clarity is there.
What will be done to ensure that frontline staff have the information that they require to be able to handle complaints such as these, and are not unclear about the data around these properties?
So we have already written out to all of those management companies to get the contacts and get the details and to get that in place, basically, and the staff will receive. The staff are competent in dealing with those anyway. This query didn't come to the right team, so that's the piece of work that's been done to make sure that other council officers know, get it to that team, and they've got the required competencies to deal with those particular issues.
Thank you very much. Councillor Allen.
Yeah, in the simple cases, the council is the freeholder of a block of flats, and the leaseholders are leaseholders from the council. That's a simple case, isn't it? And so one move, just to follow on then, why is the complication of having the managers and the sub-managers on these blocks? Like you've got 3 layers of, or it's arisen anyway, three layers of management on a block, isn't it? You've got the leaseholders, freeholder, some management company and some other management company. Can't we sort of just, why can't we dispense with those?
That's a very good question, and it does seem overcomplicated, and it's something we inherited a very long time ago. And John, as part of the HRA asset management strategy, is looking at potentially, is that something that the council would want to do, is to dispose of those particular, they're essentially shared ownership, aren't they, majority of them, about whether we'd want to dispose of those. So that would be further down the line, bring a report back here, but we need to get this sorted in the meantime. It does overcomplicate it, having a...
I think that's actually quite an interesting point to feed back, is there a way to simplify the management structures? And we have the Cabinet lead for housing on that one, so I'm sure his ears were pricked on that one. So I think I just have a few points to just check here in terms of like the process and making sure that we're doing our due diligence, I suppose. So, and you've kind of touched on this before, so sorry if this is a little bit repetitive, but it's kind of leading somewhere. So we talked about the handling of complaints, and that's my first section here, which is there was a large delay in the response. So why was that? And then how has it now been rectified?
That is, as I've just said, so the delay was the particular complaint was not allocated to the right area and was passed around, so and the officers didn't know what to do with it or where to direct it to. So that's the piece of work that's been done to make sure, understanding, particularly through the CRC, they know where those complaints go to now, and they are all handled in the home ownership team.
Okay, lovely stuff. Yeah, so I was just for the sake of clarity, but yeah, thank you for that. So then moving on to part 2 of this, which is the statutory obligations. So that is to say, we need to check that the management companies we're using are actually doing what they should be doing. So what is now the, and again, sorry if there's some repetition here, what is the process for checking that these management companies are doing what they're meant to be doing, and sort of how far along are we as a council in that process? Thank you.
The council had no involvement in any of that. Those management companies were appointed way back in the day by the Commission for the New Towns, and the lease allows for management companies to effectively sell or pass on their lease interest to someone else. Some of those management companies are resident-led, so effectively the leaseholders live in the blocks, manage those communal areas themselves. In terms of the progress that we've made, as I say, we've written to all of those management companies to, establish who they are and who the individuals are we should be communicating with. And interestingly, some of them have queried what their responsibilities are. They don't understand their obligations under the agreement either. So we were doing a lot of work, and Jill and the team are doing a sterling job in terms of we've had a lot of people come back to us already, but there are still some who we haven't had any response to, and there will be a robust in following those up. And that work will be going on over the next couple of weeks. And then Jill and the team will establish that detailed database with the contact details and the responsibilities, and indeed any obligations on our side to do chase-ups or regular contact will be included in that piece of work. So, yeah, and as I say, obviously you've not asked that question, but in terms of context, we do get less than 10 a year of these inquiries. So,
is it, Councillor Schreider, is that following on from that particular point? It was just generally, okay, thank you. So just on that, and I'm guessing so far as this is a relatively new process that you've, how long have you been, when did you first start this process? Checking the management companies?
Recently, in the last couple of months.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So on that basis then, I imagine you don't have any KPIs just yet in terms of the progress your way through, etc.
No, not yet.
Are we all right at a relevant point in the future to get KPIs on that? Because what I'd like to do, obviously, we'll bring it up now. That's great. You're obviously on it. Great. But I would like a follow-up at a future date, probably after the May elections. But on sort of the progress we're making and sort of like, these are the percentage of management companies we've reached. These are the ones that have responded. This is the support we're offering. Here's what's outstanding. That sort of thing. Just so that we have, and then if we can have that maybe in an annual report or something like that. I don't know if you've already planned that, but presumably you have. But I think that'd be helpful information just to make sure we're all doing our own due diligence.
We can certainly put it on the forward plan and bring it back in perhaps 6 months' time. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much. And then that hands over to Councillor Schroeder.
Thank you, Chairman. I think just to say that obviously the takeaway from this, certainly for me, is that these are very old structures that we've inherited. Not the buildings. I mean the governance arrangements and the structures around how we manage these things are things that we inherited from the Commission for New Towns some considerable time ago, and I think it'd be fair to say they've sort of ticked along, and as officers have said, very few inquiries, only a handful a year, and the council has been passive rather than proactive, and I think that's what we need to change now in the light of this case. In the very long term, we may, as Mrs O'Shea said in response to Councillor Allen, wish to consider whether this is something we want to simplify moving forward. But I think in the immediate term, the important thing is that we get on top of the issue now, get that database with all the management companies all sorted out. I think obviously the issue with this particular case does appear to have been that, possibly in the hurly-burly of everything that was going on in 2020, this particular case was not dealt with as it should have been. It's ended up being batted around in local government ping-pong from one team to another, but never quite reaching the right team that would have known what to do with it. And as I understand it, we have now rolled out the necessary training, so should this arise again, the relevant staff know who these cases need to be referred to, which is the home ownership team. So I think as long as we're getting on top of this now, as I say, in the long term, we may want to look at whether these are sensible arrangements. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that, Councillor Schrader. Okay, well, in that case then, if there are no other points of query, we will move on nicely to agenda item 6, which is the Empty Homes Policy and Strategy 2024. I ask the relevant council officer to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as it sets out in the report, the Council's housing strategy identifies the need to improve access to housing opportunities and choice. And whilst that specifically hasn't specifically mentioned empty homes as an option, it's clear that it's a sensible use of bringing empty homes back into use and making sure that they are available for our residents in terms of the overall strategy for tackling homelessness. So in order to support this, and as part of the follow-up to the Local Government Association peer review recently, an internal Office of Empty Homes working group was established, which reports into the Housing Task Force. So the purpose of the group was to identify the current position in relation to empty homes, review the existing empty homes policy, and produce a strategy for delivery, including the resource to support that with an associated action plan. Whilst Basildon doesn't have a significant number of empty homes, any home is a resource that shouldn't be standing wasted and empty. They have the potential for negative impacts on the neighbourhood, particularly if they've been allowed to deteriorate. Whilst most homes don't reach a stage of deterioration that prompts concern, and quite often you will see a property and not actually realise that it's empty anyway, every empty home removes that property from the housing market. The Local Government Association has issued a national report in recent months in relation to a practical approach for councils on dealing with empty homes, and it sets out a series of toolkits and experience from other local authorities about how to approach this. The report specifically recommends that councils should consider employing a dedicated empty homes resource as an absolute minimum to achieve that. As at March 2023, there were 156 properties that have been empty for over 2 years, with 100% council tax levy applied. 125 properties are on the Class F exemption list where the owners have passed away but no probate has been granted. And a number of these have been in that position for quite some while. The council has had a number of iterations of its empty homes policy over the years, but the resource to deliver has been limited. So along with the review of the current policy, it's therefore proposed that additional resources employed on a fixed term basis to support engagement with homeowners and any follow-up action. It's also proposed for the first time to engage the services of a probate researcher for a pilot project to support this activity, particularly in relation to those properties which have remained without probate. This engagement of a probate researcher is without cost to the council. The policy and strategy itself really makes use of the tools that are available to local authorities. There are a range of tools that are available, starting with informal engagement, escalating all the way up to options such as compulsory purchase. And so we'll certainly be looking to explore those and hopefully bring a number of properties back into use. The other option that we will explore as part of that is as to how we may be able to use that through the Housing Solutions Scheme to see whether or not any of the empty homeowners will engage with that service and allow a property whilst it's standing empty to be used for our tenants and those in housing need. I think that's the comments that I want to make, so I'll open for any questions, please.
So first I'll ask Councillor Schrader.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to start off by thanking Rachel Glover and her team for the work they've done on this. As Mrs Glover outlined, in a nutshell, we want to bring in a dedicated member of staff to work with a probate researcher and the owners of empty homes to explore options to bring them back into use. Now, there could be any number of reasons why a home is empty. Mostly they're awaiting the conclusion of probate or become empty due to bankruptcy, repossession or something like that. Some may simply have been abandoned for one reason or another. In some cases, owners are simply unaware of the different options available to them. So the basic idea here is that the council can try to assist by, for example, looking at an arrangement through our Housing Solutions Service, or it may be that an empty homeowner needs support in resolving a probate issue with a view to selling on the open market. I think the bottom line for us as an authority is this: empty homes have a negative impact on our local neighbourhoods, particularly if they're not properly maintained. We want to explore options with homeowners to encourage them to bring properties back into use. There are a range of mechanisms that could enable this, including through an agreement to rent, but this project is intended to work through the options available. We can't force anyone to do anything, but clearly it's in nobody's interests to have long-term empty properties just sitting around doing nothing. We'll be looking at a range of mechanisms within our legal powers to address empty homes as set out within the policy and the accompanying strategy. As the report says, every home, empty home, removes property from the housing market, and with it, opportunities for our residents to be housed, first-time buyers to purchase, or those looking to progress on the housing ladder. So anything we can do to help move the process along, bring empty homes back into use, will ultimately help rejuvenate the housing market in Basildon. So thank you, Chairman. I look forward to members' comments.
Thank you, Councillor Schrader. Councillor Yacoub.
Thank you. So the initial focus is on homes that have been empty for more than 2 years. Do we know how many homes within the Basildon Borough fall into that category? Also, there's been mention around a loan and grant scheme, but there hasn't been any kind of details around the funding of this. What will the steps be in order to get members' approval, and what kind of funding sources are we looking at for this? I actually think an empty homes officer is a good step. It is a positive step in the right direction. Another thing that I wanted to pick up was, do we have a vacant property register, and is that something that we are developing?
Thank you. I'll try and remember all the questions there. So it says in the report that as at March 23, and I appreciate that's last year, there were 156 properties that had been empty for over 2 years. Certainly that's 156 properties more than we would want, but we're not significant in terms of the wider Essex piece. In terms of a grant funding opportunity, I think that's something that we want to look at, but we haven't gone into the depth of that at the moment. I think we're quite keen to get a person in position and to start working with a probate company and understand what the situation is out there. My council tax colleagues are very proactive in terms of trying to engage with homeowners, but it can always be a bit of a struggle, and sometimes it's understanding what the family connections are in that respect, and trying to work through the problems there. There can be certain sensitivities, there could be land banking, there's a whole raft of issues that could be involved in each property. So with somebody who's got that time and resource to actually go and talk to the homeowners, find them, talk to them, follow up with them, persist with them, hopefully that will help to get a few over the line. And then in terms of the register, yes, we have got a register. Again, council tax are very active and proactive with that. And what we're doing is, or what we've been doing is, risk rating them effectively to identify those perhaps which are in a poor state, those that might be causing the biggest impact to the neighbours, but also those ones that might be most useful to in the local housing market. So we know, for example, we've got some massive properties in certain parts of the borough that perhaps perhaps being held on as land banking. So we're more focused, I think, at the moment in looking more around the centre of Basildon, the 3-bed family type homes, 3 or 4-bed family type homes.
Just to follow up, why do we think the council tax levy hasn't been effective in tackling this?
I'm not sure that we really have the answer to that, but the council tax levy, in terms of the increasing percentage, I don't think that's an issue in terms of non-payment, which I think is quite astounding, really. But for whatever reason, those homeowners are choosing to pay the additional levy, and they will have their reasons for doing so. Maybe that's one of the things that we'll be able to unpick to understand what it is that's incentivising them to continue doing that.
So just to follow on from that, because I think that's actually a very good point raised there. Have you I'm assuming you definitely haven't, but just to be clear, have you surveyed any of the residents with the who are land banking, who are paying the extra council tax, as to why they're doing that as part of your overall strategy?
We have tried previously, and I know in terms of council tax, they routinely try to make contact with homeowners. We've tried to engage as part of a review of the empty homes policy, and we have absolutely no engagement at all from the empty homeowners, which is a problem, and which is why I think we need to start from this end, get somebody in post and to start those conversations going, because it is a very difficult audience to engage with effectively.
Yes, no, very, very interesting insights. I think, yes, they're willing to pay, but they're not willing to stop. And I think I would love to know more about that, because I think that would affect both local and national policy. Mr. Brace.
I think some of the issues we've had in the past is it's the first contact we do get is when the house is in disrepair, and we're looking at enforcement and problems with the house where it may be falling down, and it's where sometimes relatives have got an emotional connection to the house and are not entirely sure what to do with it and how to deal with it. So we were trying really through this policy and strategy to get to people earlier, to give them their options. We may not succeed in getting all those homes returned, but certainly we could prevent future issues with houses going into disrepair with people that are not necessarily coping with or knowing what they can do to improve the situation.
Councillor Schrader, is that following on from this point?
Well, just because I think that's a really good point, because I think the issue we have at the moment is that because we're coming at it from the point at which the property is in disrepair, so we're coming at it from an enforcement angle, it's necessarily certainly perceived, if not intended, as a hostile approach. Whereas I think what we're seeking to introduce through this policy is a more proactive, trying to offer assistance. So if it is a probate issue, or that, like Paul says, there's certain sensitivities involved, it's a slightly softer approach. We're not at the point where we're saying you've got to do something about your property because it's an eyesore or it's causing us some other, health and safety or environmental health issue. We're getting, because inevitably you will get a certain amount of resistance and pushback against that. Whereas I think if we've got a dedicated resource who is making that slightly softer approach of, well, is there anything we can help you with? Is there any assistance you need? Can we offer you some advice, or et cetera, then that is probably more likely to yield positive engagement than if the starting point is we're trying to enforce against them.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Adamoya.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to be clear about the definition of an empty home.
I think it's in terms of it's unfurnished. Is as much as anything. So there's some legal definitions there in terms of actually how it's being used or not used, and I think in terms of if it is significantly in disrepair, I think it comes off the empty homes list as part of the legal definition. So it is one of the slightly unusual approaches to definition of empty homes, but I think it's to do with the way that council tax is set up.
Councillor Allen.
Yes, you talked about softly, but I just wonder why can't we, you mentioned compulsory purchase here, and if once you've identified the owner, because the problem with probate, you probably don't know who owns it actually, but once you've got an owner, can't you just offer them compulsory purchase with a lump sum of money, because it would be valued for compulsory purchase? So then, here you are, it's 100 grand for this property, and they're going to move in and take it, and then they can decide on that money, whether they want to do something else. But if you don't move it, we're going to have it for whatever the fair price is.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a good point. I think in terms of the range of options that are available within the strategy itself, there's a whole raft of the graduated approaches, and even with compulsory purchase, there might be some conversations. Actually, yes, I really want to get the shot of this property. I don't want the hassle of engaging an estate agent, and that might be an opportunity that we can explore. But in terms of compulsory purchase, there is a process that we have to follow. It's a legal process. It's not a short process. So I think if we can avoid that, then ideally that's what we want to do, because obviously there would be a cost to the council involved with that as well. So, but it is one of the options that we can consider.
Councillor Schrader, is that on this point?
Yeah, I was going to say that obviously that compulsory purchase is an arrow in our quiver, but it's certainly not the ideal solution from a cost and resource point of view, because the process for going through a compulsory purchase is not by any means straightforward, and it's quite resource intensive, as I understand it. I've never known us to do one, but I imagine it's fairly resource intensive. And again, it's quite a confrontational approach. And if we can come to an arrangement with an empty homeowner where, for example, they do agree to rent the property through housing solutions, obviously that'd be a much cheaper and less confrontational solution for us as a council than going directly to the compulsory purchase route. I mean, there may be any reason why we may get to the stage where compulsory purchase is an option we wish to consider, but I wouldn't have said it was an ideal solution certainly from a cost and resource point of view for the council.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also some legal technicalities with that as well. So, but yes, okay, good. Well, so on that basis, I have a couple of questions myself. So just first off, and this is a very, very quick one, all of the voids strategy here, none of this is coercive. That is to say, we're not forcing our residents to do anything against their will or with great impunity or anything like that. Just wanted to just double check that.
When you're talking about residents, councillor, are you talking about the homeowners, or is that I'm assuming that's whom you're talking about, the empty homeowners?
As a start for 10, but for example, other residents that, for example, are in a house and want to move them, they're not being forced to move out of where their current accommodation is, for example. Just that sort of thing.
So in terms of the empty homeowners, there won't be anybody living in the homes, and because of the steps that council tax will take, they do keep a physical check on the properties. So there won't be anybody that would be forced of moving out of those homes, and certainly, as I think we've already alluded to, there would be a graduated approach to engaging with the homeowners to try to persuade them to bring the home back into use.
And then equally, just following on from that, because part of this strategy is also looking at helping people downsize. No one's being forced to downsize. That is an entirely voluntary, supportive thing. Is that correct?
I think in terms of empty homes, that wouldn't be included as part of the empty homes policy or strategy. I think that would be a separate issue. But again, that's something. If an opportunity arose and we felt that there was perhaps an opportunity to rehouse into one of the empty properties through an arrangement with the HRA side of things, then that's not impossible. So I think we just need to keep our minds open to the fact that there could be any number of options and opportunities depending on the nature, the size, the location, and the condition of the property.
Okay, so then just moving on specifically to what we've got here. Do we have any evidence to show how effective this is, for example, in other councils? Has this been ever tried elsewhere, and how effective has it been? Do you have any information on that? Thank you.
I think it has a varied success, I think, and certainly that's why the Local Government Association has pulled together the toolkit for local authorities. There is a National Empty Homes Network and the probate researcher that we're looking at engaging to work on the pilot project is part of the Empty Homes Network, so we'll be certainly drawing on their expertise and the work that they've done with other local authorities. So yes, I think, and I think that the level of success depends on the amount of resource that's put into it, and I think that's fair to say that's probably going to be what brings the success. Will be the dedicated resource, and I'm not aware that we've had that for a long time, if ever.
But we do now. We will have. Okay, yeah, fine. This is what this is about. Okay, fine. And just then following on from that sort of effectiveness, so obviously a resource is part of it, that makes sense. What are the associated costs, and then what are the possible return on investments, i.e. savings for the council, from this?
Thank you, Chairman. So we've set aside some budget for 2 years, for up to 2 years' salary, on the basis of it would be around 50 to 57k salary for each year. There is no cost for the probate researcher, which I think I've already explained. Then in terms of return on investment, a piece of work has been done with our finance team to look at the costs of rehousing homeless people in terms of bed and breakfast accommodation and the associated costs with that. And there is a clear return on investment if we can engage and get those empty homes back into use, particularly if we can also obtain some use out of those directly.
And sorry to ask for a very, very specific figure here, but to bed and breakfast one person, homeless person for a year, what is the approximate cost of the council?
I'll give my apologies for that because I thought I'd actually got it in the report.
In 2 minutes.
Okay, fine. Well, simply because my logic here is, I'm thinking that cost is definitely going to be greater than the 57k salary for the people And so on that basis, if you provide one new home for us to put a homeless person in, you've already paid for the salary for 2 years just by doing one person being moved. Hence the reason why I've asked the question. Assuming you come back to me with that figure, I would like to hear the mathematical figure, but I think that's my point. Is more all this cost is a salary for 2 years, which admittedly, you add it all up, that's 114,000 over 2 years. But I have a strong suspicion that if you would get at least one home dedicated for homelessness instead of just being empty, that you would otherwise would have been paying for a person to be in a bed and breakfast, I think that's going to be more than 114k over 2 years. So there are a couple of people that want to speak. Is that on what we're talking about now? I've got also Councillor Schrader. Was yours on this now one we're talking about now? But you have for Yaqub to Councillor Yaqub.
Literally just to say that I've got a note down here from the report that states that a full year of bed and breakfast accommodation for someone costs a minimum of 30k per year. So 2 properties brought back into use would cover the salary.
Well done. Thank you. Very astute. Okay, well that answered that question. There we go. Councillor Schrader.
Yeah, just to endorse what you said, and indeed what Councillor Yaqub just said. I think from our point of view, the salary for the dedicated staff is a fairly minimal outlay when you consider, what we discussed at the budget meeting the other day. We know that the effect that temporary accommodation is having on the budget. It's costing us an absolute fortune to house people in nightly lets, very expensive nightly lets, B&B accommodation, hotels, etc. It's not ideal from their point of view either. It's certainly not ideal from our point of view. So if, as Councillor Yaqub says, even if we brought 1 or 2 properties onto the rental market through an agreement through Housing Solutions, and that alleviated the need to put somebody in very expensive temporary accommodation, we will have already made our money back. So I certainly think it's worth having a punt to see if a dedicated resource can yield some results in this area, because it's a lot of property sitting around doing nothing very productive for anybody, other than our colleagues in council tax who are still raking in the dosh somehow. I think it's well worth having a go.
Yes, I don't want to set the bar too low for you, but 2 is the minimum. 2 per year. If you can do a minimum of 2 per year, we have return on investment. I pray that you get a lot more than that. Okay, so sorry, just in order of people asking, Councillor Allen.
Just to make a point, what we're dealing with is like 2 houses, 156, but it is a national problem that shows over 1 million homes were classed as unoccupied. That's 1 million homes that are not being used properly. It's a big issue when we're trying to build houses for people. There's 1 million there ready for occupation. It's a serious problem.
Councillor Yaqub, you've answered. Councillor Yaqub, Councillor Adam-Moyer.
Yes, I just wondered if there was a cost of acquisition of the property. Are we trying to acquire the property?
I think it would depend on the outcome of any negotiations with the homeowner, really, and certainly I think they're likely to be member involvement if there was a compulsory purchase or an arrangement to purchase the property in any format. But in terms of use of the property, there are packages for, particularly with Housing Solutions, have arrangements with private landlords. So I wouldn't envisage that would be used in any or would be approached in any other way. I think the other things that you want to look at, we've mentioned about the grants, so there would be a cost if we were to offer a grant, but again on the basis that there would be some return, so that could be conditional perhaps upon if we give you a grant to upgrade the property, then you will need to lease it to us for X amount of time. So there's a number of options, but I think we need to get into the very early stages to see, firstly we've got to get somebody into the position, and secondly, we need to get them to sort of start working and unpicking some of the issues as to why these properties are remaining vacant.
Okay, fine. So 3 minimum then on the back of that, just to be, absolutely safe. Okay, in that case, if there are no other queries on that point, I think we can close that agenda item. Okay, so we've already done 7, because we've moved that forward. So that leaves us very nicely to part 8, which is the work programme, on pages 93 to 98. And then on this one, is it just, there's no report from anybody, is there?
Yeah, there's a report.
Oh, there is. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. So item 8, we have the work programme, which provides members with an opportunity to consider and identify items for the committee's work programme. I refer members to pages 94 and 95. We have one more meeting of the municipal year, and then we've got a number of items being carried forward to the next municipal year, which you'll see listed. So the report is just asking members to note and endorse the items currently identified for the work programme and those that are going to be carried forward, and also to note the cabinet work, the cabinet forward plan identified at enclosure 1. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any comments from members on this one? Well, as that invisible tumbleweed blows by, I think we can say that would be a no additional comments. Thank you for that. In which case, I declare today's meeting closed, 9:20. You can all thank me later. Thank you very much, everybody.